What is going on, everyone? Tim from Tierfon Orbital. So today I'm going to talk about an install commission that I completed on a Shadowcrest hilt. Prior to doing this install, I had never heard of Shadowcrest lights. I believe it's Shadowcrest lightsabers. I never heard of this company or this individual prior to doing this one. So this was my first experience with this hilt. So this was there was a few not challenges, but there was a few confounding things during this install that I had to get past. I'm laughing because of a few reasons. One, my dog is at my feet and he's hungry. But yeah, so there was a few confounding things about this install that I want to talk about, obviously. There is a little bit of a different way to use this hilt and put the chassis in because it's just a little bit of a different setup with this one, right? So let's come into Fusion first and talk about the chassis, and then we will come up top and talk about the hilt and talk about how to use it, and then we'll do a demo, right? So let's come into Fusion. All right, so here it is, right? Chassis, relatively simple. Tim, why is there a panel separated from the chassis? Well, because I printed this panel in resin, right? So I've been doing this now and then with my chassis because I like to, with smaller chassis, like smaller internal diameter chassis like this. So this is a 1-inch chassis. I like to do this because I get a little bit more granular detail than I do with PLA, right? So this panel was done in resin, then it was just C8 glued to the side of the chassis, right? Along the other side of the chassis is a window for a 2020 NeoPixel strip. I just kind of fished that up through this channel here. There is a Mylar strip in front of that as well. At the bottom, there is a 24mm speaker that is from Smuggler's Outpost. Battery tray is here. This is a tilted Proffie board setup, right? So the Proffie board essentially just kind of lives in this groove or this channel here. Plenty of room to get your USB port and your SD card if you need to. There is a notch here, and we will talk about that in a second. This is functional. This will assist in not only putting the chassis in the right way, but it also, this is part of what helps secure the chassis in the hilt, right? 6-rail male or female end of the PCB is up top. This is what makes this connection to the upper part of the hilt. And that's it, right? A relatively simple chassis, kind of short, right? That's why I chose to go with a tilted Proffie board setup. I like doing this with thinner internal diameter hilts, just because it makes it, you get a little bit more space. I actually really like doing a tilted Proffie board because you don't have to flip the board up. You can just plug in your USB whenever you're ready. You can pull the SD card out if you need to. I really like doing them like this. I try to do most of my personal builds like this as well. So anyhow, that's it. Let's come up top. Okay, so here it is. This is a custom from Shadowcrest Lightsabers. I'm just going to assume that's what the name of the company is, right? So when I received this hilt, the first thing that I noticed was that there was no pommel.
Why?
So like you're looking, I thought maybe the pommel, I thought maybe that the pommel was missing from the build. So I reached out to the customer, and the customer did reassure me that, nope, this is actually just how the hilt is. So I thought maybe the hilt was not finished, because I did also notice that there's like some overspray on the inside, like from powder coating on the inside of the hilt. So I just was kind of confused. Maybe it was just forgotten, but I guess this is how the hilt is intended to be, right? With no pommel. So my first, not challenge, but the first thing that we had to figure out was how to install this hilt with no pommel, right? So usually you've got a pommel in place to kind of help if you're doing a removable chassis. Obviously that helps the pommel, or the pommel helps the chassis stay inside of the hilt, right? I did not want to do an all-in-one chassis, right? Because apparently, according to the maker of this hilt, this screw is supposed to hold the chassis in place. I did not want to do an all-in-one chassis that solely relied on this one screw to stay in place. Then you're jamming a blade down on one chassis that's kind of held in place with one screw. I didn't want to do that, right? So I chose to go with a removable chassis setup that is held in place with this one screw, okay? Prior to doing that, however, I did notice a few other inconsistencies about this hilt, right? So on the inside of this hilt, there was a lot of, I mean, what looked to me like overspray. I'm not sure how you would get overspray from powder coating or spray painting on the inside of a hilt. It might have been aluminum black as well, but the inside of this hilt was just not cleaned. And you really want to make sure that the inside of the hilt is clean, especially when you're doing a removable chassis. Otherwise, it's just going to kind of scrape. It's just not going to go in correctly. Another thing that I noticed was this hardware, right? So we've got some screws that are holding these outer shrouds in place. All of this hardware was protruding to the inside of this. Well, most of it was protruding to the inside of the hilt. So I had to go in and make sure I had to back some of these out and grind them down so they weren't poking into the inside of the hilt, right? You really want to make sure that the internal diameter of this hilt is clean and the same circumference all of the way through. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get your chassis through, right? Or you're going to have to mess with putting notches in your chassis, and like nobody wants to do that, right? So you've got to make sure that the inside of the hilt is just one continuous circle, essentially, right? So I had to do that. Another thing that I had to take into account, right? So it appears as though this hilt is two separate tubes. So there's a 1-inch tube on the inside, right? I think, no. Yeah. So on the inside of this hilt, it's two separate tubes, right? So if anytime you have two separate tubes on the internal diameter of a hilt, if those two tubes are 1 millimeter, even a fraction of a millimeter off, your chassis is not going to slide in. It's just not. It's not going to go in all the way. Luckily, the seam of that was above where this set screw is. Okay, so I was able to make a chassis that was short enough that was before that seam. But that was another thing that I noticed, because when I made the upper PCB holder for this, I tried to slide it in through the bottom, and it just kind of stopped. And that was something that I noticed. Okay, so just a few things that I had to take into account while doing this one, right? Just it kind of seemed like it was kind of done, not finished. Was my first thought, right? It kind of sounds like I'm complaining, but there were just a few things that we had to address prior to the install, right? So anyhow, really, really interesting looking etch on this one. So let's talk about how to use this guy. Here is the chassis. No kill switch in this one. You are effectively the kill switch in this install. Spring side is your negative, so you want to take the flat part of your battery, put that negative side towards the speaker. So this was already on. So once you get your battery in, you're ready to go. Okay? So there's that accent strip. All right. So putting this chassis in is a little, not tricky, but you got to make sure you're putting it in the right way, right? So there is that black set screw. I did mention that notch in that chassis, okay? You want to slide your chassis in where that notch is, line it up with that screw. I try to make sure you're not pressing the cone of that speaker, but just kind of make sure it's pushing into those PCB pins, and then tighten that set screw. That's going to hold that chassis in place, okay? And then you're ready to go. All right, let's come out of the bottom. All right, so not the most ideal setup for putting a chassis in the hilt. I forgot to mention while we were up top, I did make a handy dandy chassis pusher thing, right? So you don't really want to be pushing the cone of this speaker, right? So this is hollow in the middle. This is just going to kind of help you push that chassis up into those pins. And as you're pushing that, tighten that set screw to hold that chassis in place. I've also replaced that black set screw that came with this with a, with a chunkier M5 screw. This is just a little bit of a bigger screw to kind of bite down on that chassis a little bit more. Don't over crank it. Obviously you don't want to like deform the chassis in any way, but that's just going to kind of help you push that chassis up in place without pushing your finger into the cone of that speaker, right? All right. Let's see what else we put on here. All right. So let's put a blade in it. So there is a single set screw up top here that will serve as your blade retention. So you want to kind of put your blade down. Oh, hold on one second. So it just kind of looks like, so no, when you are popping holes for set screws in hilts, you really want to make sure that you're filing down the inside of the hilt after you're done, because as you're drilling into the hilt, you're causing a burr to form on the inside of the hilt, right? And that's gonna, obviously that's gonna cause things to kind of scrape. It's gonna cause the, if it's a set screw for a blade, it's gonna cause the blade to not want to go in there. So I just had to file that down a little bit more. Just another thing I know, a little intricacy noticed about this hilt. So yeah, so put your blade in, tighten that set screw. You're ready to go. I'm gonna dim the lights here. All right. What else we put on here. So this is a single button Proffie setup, right? So to scroll through your fonts, it's a long press of the button and release to go forward while the hilt is pointed up. To go back in your fonts, you want to point it down, long press and release. Twist to activate, twist the deactivator on.
What is it? Light saber.
One more.
I am no Jedi.
Man, I just realized something. I just realized my ceiling fan is on and I'm swinging my blade around. It is so nice to have a short demo blade. I got this from a buddy of mine. Thank you, by the way, for the demo blade. So that is it, right? That is a custom from Shadowcrest Lightsabers. Just an interesting staring straight into the soul of the speaker down there, right? So anyhow, yeah, just yeah, to the customer, just be aware that that is, that set screw is what's holding that chassis in place, right? So anyhow, that is all I have. If anyone has any questions about this particular install, I know I did. Please do not be a stranger. And to the customer, thank you very much for trusting me with this install. And with that being said, may the force be with you always. Have a good one, everybody.